The conversation surrounding the U.S.-Mexico border is a highly political subject, especially in states that border our friends to the south. While physical barriers and infrastructure have entered into our collective imagery of today's border, nothing has a more tangible impact than policy. One such policy enacted by the Trump administration forced thousands of migrants, some seeking asylum, to wait in Mexico for their day in U.S. court. Despite the Biden administration's attempt to end that policy, it remains in effect to this day, further complicating the president's goal of enacting lasting change to the immigration system and address the growing masses that arrive at the border in search of refuge. Here's Bianca with the story.
We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
They did it. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected president and vice president in 2020, after campaigning on a platform promising to undo much of what former President Donald Trump implemented during his administration. One of their biggest campaign promises? Immigration reform. More specifically, they promised to reinstate the asylum process that had been all but eliminated under two policies enacted by Trump: Migrant Protection Protocols, also called Remain in Mexico, and Title 42. Fast forward more than a year after Biden was inaugurated, and what is his administration doing to reform immigration and the asylum process?
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border.
The short answer is that they're both still there. And these were both hallmarks of the Trump immigration policy. They're something that I think in the light of history, we will look at as very similar to the proposal of building a giant border wall from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. But I think what's interesting about these policies still being in place is that, they were kind of campaign promises of the Biden administration was getting rid of them. My name is Ev Mead, and I'm director of Proceso Pacifico, which is a peace-building organization where we work mostly in Mexico. And I've worked on U.S.-Mexico border issues for the last 25 years or so.
Implemented in January 2019, the Remain in Mexico program forced asylum-seeking migrants to wait on the Mexico side of the U.S.-Mexico border when adjudicating their asylum claims. Over the course of the initial phase of the program, about 70,000 migrants were turned away from ports of entry. Then the pandemic happened, and Title 42, a provision in the health code prohibiting the entry of people who present a threat of spreading a communicable disease, was invoked by the Trump administration. It completely shut down the asylum process in March 2020.
The idea that we would change the entry policy to the United States at land ports of entry, but also at airports and everywhere else, I think we can give them a little bit of a pass on that, even the Trump administration, in the sense that at the very beginning, this was spreading quickly. It was coming from outside the United States, and it wasn't totally unreasonable to think that that some kind of immigration lockdown would be part of the broader lockdown. As soon as you get a couple of months into the pandemic, however, that became a really questionable proposition. And it became a questionable proposition for a couple reasons. Number one, the case counts in the United States were higher than they were in most of Mexico. So if anything, the risk was, people from the United States going to Mexico. Number two was exactly that. Mexico didn't close the border, and the US didn't prevent Americans who traveled to Mexico from returning. The public health thing ended up just being an excuse. And that's where you look at sort of the third level of it, which is an excuse for what? Well, it's an excuse for what the Trump administration had publicly announced was the point of their immigration policy. It was to stop immigration to the United States by deterrence, period. And that's immigration, all immigration, legal immigration, unauthorized immigration, openly illegal immigration, refugees, migrants, everybody.
Our country is full. We don't want people coming up here. Our country is full. We want Mexico to stop. We want all of them to stop. Our country is packed to the gills. We don't want them coming up.
Title 42's impact on immigration has resulted in an unprecedented number of apprehensions at the border. This fiscal year, it's projected nearly 2 million apprehensions will happen. Last year's 1.7 million apprehensions marked the highest number in history. But those numbers don't tell the whole story.
That's true. It's technically true. But it's also only true because, number one, 360,000 or so of those folks are the same folks who've been nabbed more than once. And two, the only reason they've been nabbed more than once is because, thanks to Title 42, lots of people are being apprehended on the border and they're very quickly kicked back to Mexico, regardless of where they're from. And so they keep trying and they keep getting counted a second time, a third time, a fourth time. And in fact, it makes the border look a lot more out of control than it really is.
And those turned away from seeking asylum under Title 42 are subject to an even more disjointed policy than those waiting in Mexico under Remain in Mexico.
These folks are turned away from the U.S. without any chance of being able to apply for asylum. And really, this one can be much worse for people because you don't know what's going to happen to you when you're sent back with Title 42. People can be sent back to Mexico. They can be deported back to their home countries. They can be deported in what is being called a chain refoulement, which refoulement is the term for sending someone back to a situation that it is known that they are going to be in danger. Or in probably one of the most bizarre possibilities is they could be sent to just some other country randomly under the pretense that this region needs to take responsibility for this problem as well.
That's Cody Copeland, the Courthouse News Mexico correspondent. He recently traveled to the U.S.-Mexico border to speak to migrants being returned under what's being dubbed MPP 2.0, or the second iteration of Remain in Mexico. That's because, unlike his continued enforcement of Title 42, Biden has fought to get rid of the MPP program, or at least he has on paper.
The Secretary of Homeland Security put out a memorandum conveying we want to end this program, but we also believe in following the law, and that's exactly what we're doing, as there was a ruling that required us moving forward with implementation.
The Biden administration has been able to say that it's forced to re-implement migrant protection protocols, but it has also defended its use of Title 42. It's been postulated that maybe it's to try and not appear too lax on immigration so as not to irk conservatives. But in doing so, the administration has irked those on the left who had hoped he would get rid of these inhumane programs as he said he would on the campaign trail. And we're actually seeing a split in his administration as officials who had been pushing for reform are actually preparing to leave.
After nixing the Remain in Mexico program, Biden was sued by Texas and Missouri, who claimed by getting rid of the program, they'd incur costs related to housing, schooling, and providing medical care to asylum seekers. It's a legal strategy we've seen before.
This set of challenges arose when the Biden administration tried to suspend the MPP program, and they did it perhaps a bit lazily. They said, well, we think it's bad. It's been challenged in the courts. We sort of campaigned against it. So we're going to use the power of the executive branch and some administrative tools, and we're going to stop doing it. Like the Obama administration before them, they didn't cross all their T's and dot all their I's. They didn't come up with a very good explanation for it, much less give a full legal analysis of it. And they were sued, most prominently by a group of states who claim, this is very similar to the claims made against DACA against the Obama administration, that's going to impose some undue costs on them to have these folks coming and being in the United States while their cases are being adjudicated.
The states were successful. In December, the Biden administration implemented the second version of Remain in Mexico, starting first in El Paso, Texas, before reintroducing the program in San Diego, California. So far, less than 300 people waiting for their asylum cases to be adjudicated have been returned to Mexico. But that figure is expected to increase by the summer.
Although the numbers are low right now for MPP, they're on par with what we saw in the first few months of the first MPP under the Trump administration. And so when that started in January 2019, even by March, the numbers weren't outrageous. But by July, they were turning away over 10,000 people a month. The U.S. Embassy from Mexico City told shelter organizers in Tijuana that they wouldn't turn back more than 30 migrants a day, which that's, nothing, there's nothing in place to actually like hold the U.S. government to that at all. But by extrapolating that number to the 7 cities to which it's ultimately going to be rolled out along the border, experts said we could see as many as 6,500 migrants turned back each month and put into MPP.
If more people than ever are being turned away from being welcomed into the United States, why do they keep coming?
People come to the United States in large numbers for 2 reasons. And this has been true for the last 100 years. They come because of war, and they come because of big macroeconomic conditions. And, you can add things like, changing climate and some of the effects to that, to those macroeconomic conditions. But that's really it. They don't come because of immigration policy.
Although there are specifics in each person's or each family's story, the origin of the violence that pushes them out might be different. The one overarching thing that all of these people have in common is that getting to the United States and asking for asylum, as dangerous as that is the safest option they have. I spoke with a mother of 5 daughters from Honduras who said that once her daughters reached the age of 11, 12, 13, the gang members there in Honduras wanted to take them and rape them. And when she didn't let that happen, they said, well, you have this many days to get out of here or we're going to, burn your house down and take them by force.
I left because they wanted to rape my daughters, the youngest ones that I have with me here. And if you don't give them what they want, they threaten you and say you have a certain amount of time to leave.
And those who do make it to the U.S. find their return to Mexico where they face conditions slightly less, if not just as dangerous, as the violence that they fled.
I don't want to stay in Mexico because I've experienced lots of harassment here. The reason I'm fleeing these conditions is because of my daughters. Life is already what it is for an adult like me, but my kids are still very young. I've got one who's 13, another who's about to be 15, one who is 16, and another who is 11. But if I knew that my children were going to have to live through the same kind of violence we saw in Honduras, we would have just stayed there.
While violence and poverty are driving factors for those seeking refuge in the United States, the people seeking safety and new opportunities changes year by year.
If you look at the data in 2021, you compare it to 2020, and you compare it to 2019 and 2018, what you find is that in each of those years, there was sort of a different main driver, and there are very different populations coming. This year, something really, really different is happening on the border right now. We should probably be talking about that rather than just sort of having the same debate about no wall versus a wall or harsh policy versus humane policy. What's happening is for the first time since we've been collecting data on the border, this other category, meaning people who are neither Mexican nor Central American, is the biggest category of apprehensions, like 180,000 people.
A huge block of these migrants, those from Haiti, who originate from Haiti, aren't even considered refugees, since they're not fleeing directly from Haiti right now, but rather countries like Chile and Brazil. Despite the fact that Haiti is not a safe place to live, they aren't considered refugees.
A group of 11 Haitian asylum seekers has filed a class action lawsuit against the Biden administration, accusing the government of physical and verbal abuse, racial discrimination, denial of due process, and other severe rights violations while they were forced to take shelter under a bridge in the borderlands of Del Rio, Texas in September. It was in Del Rio where U.S. Border Patrol agents on horseback whipped Haitian asylum seekers as they waded across the Rio Grande.
No matter what countries migrants are coming from, or the circumstances they are fleeing, they're facing the same roadblock, waiting in Mexico.
Companies like the corporation FEMSA, which runs the largest chain of convenience stores here in the country, OXXO, has recently dedicated itself to hiring immigrants from Haiti. And so really you're kind of seeing this trend of migrants who are realizing that it's just extremely difficult to get asylum in the United States. Many of them are now staying and working in Mexico, in border cities. I spoke with several shelter directors in several towns along the border who said that, yes, they had migrants from MPP, but many of these people had year and a half, 2-year wait times. And so they are now living in these cities like Matamoros, Reynosa, and renting places and working most likely in the informal economy, which I saw a report the other day that jobs in the informal economy shot up at the end of last year.
Even though President Biden promised to get rid of Trump's signature asylum blocking policies, a year after he took office, there's still the status quo, and promises he made to keep those subjected to MPP 2.0 will be put to the test in the next few months.
We could see migrants waiting years again, even though the Biden administration promised to limit wait times to 6 months or less. However, the first hearings from people put in MPP 2.0 in December were set for April and May, so around 5-6 months out. And so if there's any delay, which we can expect delays, then they'll blow right past that 6-month promise.
A silver lining, more asylum seekers are being represented by attorneys in immigration court.
And that's a big deal because that translates into outcomes. And so we do see that the denial rate for people who apply for asylum has gone down. Not dramatically, but it's down. It's true that more people who are applying and actually getting their day in court are represented by counsel and are winning their cases.
Meade said Trump's harsh immigration policies had a ripple effect. It galvanized a community of attorneys to help represent migrants in court.
There's a community of dedicated immigrant advocates who've been recruiting pro bono attorneys to do cases, people like Casa Cornelia here in San Diego or the National Immigrant Justice Center. But then the Trump administration and the really harsh kind of anti-immigrant tone and policies also brought a lot of new people to that movement. And groups like Al Otro Lado, who are US-based immigration attorneys who practice in US courts, but their office and the work that they do is actually in Mexico, that are based in Tijuana. They really galvanized a whole lot of support and brought a whole lot more lawyers to the cause.
Even though more migrants are represented during asylum hearings, when it comes to U.S. immigration policy, it doesn't seem to matter what party the president belongs to. We can expect more of the same.
I think the Biden administration is kind of like trying to take advantage of the fact that it was technically Trump who put these policies into place and saying like, well, it's not us. We just have to do it like that. It has gotten really bad thanks to Trump. But U.S. policy, economic, military, and immigration has just been taking advantage of these people for decades now. Unless we actually follow U.S. law that says people have the right to apply for asylum, it's not going to get any better.